So I'm going to, this is December 14th, 2022. I'll call the meeting to order. We have a quorum. I will ask Nancy Crawley to say,
Here.
and Joe. Joe is our newest member of the personnel board, and I will wait just a few minutes to see if we have our other two personnel board members who I'm anticipating will be here. I would like Joe to be able to introduce himself. We have several folks that are on Zoom. We don't have anyone else besides the four of us here. It will serve a good purpose to have Joe introduce himself, talk a little bit about his background, perhaps the time he's been here, how long he's been in Concord, maybe a little bit about whatever schooling or just so that the people in the town will be able to get a sense of who you are, and that will, I think, help greatly if we have gone from a minuscule 3 people to now 5, very robust. But it's good to be able to have added Joe and then Kate Ryan, who is expected to be here, and there's Cobbs, who is also expected to be here. So it's, if I look at the agenda, we do not have minutes to review and approve. So I think what we can do here, and if there are folks who are listening in on Zoom who are having a difficult time hearing us, please acknowledge, or please wave at us, and we'll try to see if we can improve the communication setup. So I think maybe what I'd like to have, let's go to article agenda item 3. And this is material that we've actually already gone over last meeting, but I think it would be important, especially since you have invited employees, citizens, whoever, to participate in tonight's meeting, whether in person or Zoom. But I think it would be good to review those particular items. Okay.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay. So I'm going to what's the third page of the packet, and please give me a moment to share my screen so that I can find it. Let me share the screen. Come on. Okay. The agenda, and I'm going to the bylaw. So there was an introductory page actually before I get to it, but it's just it gives a idea of what's going on with the bylaw changes. So as we talked about, the town meeting warrant deadline is quickly approaching. It's the beginning of January on the 4th. And so, I think what the board is trying to do is see if there are any bylaw amendments we're proposing to town meeting this year that would help pave the path for the next year, but also not move forward with anything that hasn't been fully vetted or talked about. We understand that, we're far in this process, that, the task force report came in, we've been evaluating that, and so we're not trying to rock the boat and not give people an opportunity to be heard. But if there's some meaningful changes that everybody says, yep, this makes sense, to go ahead to do that. So these discussions over this week and next week and meeting staff does it make sense to go ahead with any of these proposed amendments, or are these things that don't make sense to go ahead with right now? All right, so that's it. And would they help to provide some clarity for people and make implementation of class and comp issues helpful? And there's a couple on the meeting that might help pave the path as well. So I'll talk about those as we get there, but it may be too much for this year. Okay. So anyway, going through these in the entire document, we would like to look at changing any gender-specific terms with gender-neutral terms, so pronouns or, if there's still reference to the select board, that sort of thing, and going through the bylaw and making those changes. So you still need to work on what that warrant article would look like. So I have been in touch with the moderator on some cases, and we're trying to figure out exactly how some of these warrant articles will go. So moving forward to definitions, there was a discussion at the last personnel board meeting where they started looking at them. It seemed like it might be helpful to get some more clarity on things related to the classification and compensation plan descriptions, as well as differences between a promotion and a reclassification, that sort of thing. So these are not all of the definitions that are in the bylaw. These are the ones that are related to those, and some proposed amendments. Most of it is the same as what the board saw last time, with a little bit of a change on the one classification system. So I'll go through quickly here. The first one, when you see red, that indicates language that isn't in the bylaw right now. So right now there's a definition of classification plan. It's a listing of all approved position classification titles and a summary job description for each classification, what the bylaw says now. But we talked about that it's not helpful to consider the job description to be part of the classification plan itself. It is an important tool that is used along with others to classify positions. So we're not proposing that there's not a requirement for job description. There is still a requirement for job description in the bylaw, but it didn't seem like it made sense to keep that as part of the description here. And instead, the proposal is to add language that says that it's a listing of position classification titles that have been evaluated using the classification system. That's what a plan is using a system. Classification system was not previously defined in here, so let's take over to that one. That's what I'm talking about. That would be a new definition. And the wording here says it's proposed a job evaluation tool that groups positions using a standardized scale that considers factors such as level and impact of work, required qualifications, and working conditions. The first version you saw, it's an established method, and some question came up of whether that was the right wording. So here's another proposal, and it's an evaluation tool. And this is consistent with what another part of the bylaw talks about, is that there needs to be a uniform system for evaluating position. And I couldn't know that it needs further consideration, just because I think that was the one that there was most question about, whether it encapsulated everything that we needed it to. So jumping back up for a moment to the description for compensation plan, the bylaw currently refers to that the compensation plan needs to have an intermediate wage or rate. And so this recommendation is that they take out that, because it is important to have a minimum and a maximum rate. But so the intermediate rate depends on the type of plan that you have, and sometimes there are steps, so it's not going to have an in between. Sometimes there might be a merit range at the end, and since we haven't defined that, and we see why the bylaw needs to specify that we have an intermediate. I think that limits the ability to look at different plans as we go forward. And then as a clarification, suggesting adding the word base before wage or salary rates. And that relates to something that the task force pointed out, that in addition to the rates that are listed in the compensation plan, there are some other types of pay that are even allowed in the bylaw, section 10 of the bylaw, such as longevity pay. That's on top of that. So it would help to differentiate between base pay and then the other types of pays that go on to that. Okay. Then I'll move on to the description of promotion, and it seems like this has has resulted in some confusion for people. Right now, it says the promotion is the movement of an employee from one position into another position, which is in a classification with a higher maximum salary. Well, the maximum salary in itself isn't a promotion. If I decided to become a line worker, I went to line school and I become a line worker, and if that happens to be, and I'm an HR now, and that happens in a higher range, that doesn't mean it's a promotion for me. It means that type of position has a different pay rate, or vice versa. Somebody wants to go and public work. So promotion is typically more, within the hierarchy of a position. It's a field of work. It's not about what the salary range itself is. So I don't think that's the right description, particularly in a plan that's become as complex as ours has through the years. I think that used to be more true in the past. We had we had smaller number of job groups. Now we have a wide variety. And so I think that's led to some confusion. So here's some language that's been put on the table, and again, all of this could be refined if it's something that people think we should move forward with and try to put forth in the warrant. But as it's to say, the movement of an employee from one position into another position that is in the same field of work has greater responsibilities and is in a classification with a higher salary range maximum. So some things to think about. If that doesn't work, again, I don't think this is a critical change, but for clarity, it may help people to understand the difference. So if we feel like there's a comfortable, if the definition is working better, then you might move forward with it. If it needs further thought, you may decide not to move forward with it at this point. So reclassification is another way that positions move. And I'll note promotion is about employees moving from one position to another, and reclassification is about a position that is moving from a classification to another classification. But we don't think that this definition actually addresses all the ways that a position is classified. And so some additional language that might be helpful is to say, or from one salary grade to another salary grade within the same classification and compensation plan. So the classification is a job title. And so if somebody's job, I'll give you an example. Sometimes the classification title doesn't change. If let's say a public works supervisor who's in grade 2 and it's decided that based on the responsibilities that have been given over time now it's going to move to grade 3, it can still keep the same classification title, but it would move from one salary grade to the other. And so I just don't think that this description of classification caught in that sort of move. Okay. So again, if it helps for clarification, it works with seeing that kind of language makes a difference. And again, I think these definitions will be important as we want our new plan to get out of the big plan to be understandable by everybody. And that's been something that we're hearing. People don't understand the details, and that's been an issue. I would move on to section 5, unless anybody has a question or comment, and I think we'll want to include anybody on the Zoom to public questions or comments as we move along.
Sorry. Yeah, yes, I've got a couple comments and maybe other members. But I want to put this on the airplane mode. Never call So I'd like to two specific comments, and I'm wondering. First one has to do with the classification system definition. Mm-hmm. I think if there are factors that GovHR is going to be recommended that are more than just these 3 impact and work. Okay. that we should not put down three, because we should put down all of the factors that GovHR is going to recommend. Now, I know we don't know that yet, but I'm wondering what's the value of not, but why wouldn't we want to have all factors listed? Wouldn't it be better to have actually nothing changed there until we actually got all of the factors present? Because we have to go back and change it anyway. So I'm just trying to understand the value of making any change until we know exactly what factors GovHR is going to be including in their recommended system. So that's point one.
A couple of thoughts. Right now, we have no different definition of classification system. I would caution against using specific ones because the classification system that's used could change over time. And you really want to have to do a bylaw change to do that. I wonder if that was the case, if you were concerned about listing some of the examples, whether it would be better to just doesn't give the example, maybe a standardized scale based on common factors or something like that. I have to think about it. But I would caution about being that specific. It's not about the particular system. It's defining what a system, what classification system is.
Yeah, I recognize that. I think I'm still, and maybe I don't still learning how to differentiate and how to guide these kind of discussions and points from the bylaw into policies, because this may be a really good example of having a much more generalized discussion or generalized definition, and then being able to incorporate the specifics into policy.
Right.
Because what I want to avoid, I guess, is that if this is in the bylaw, it all of a sudden seems to me that it takes on a greater significance than we really actually want it to. The point here we want to make is that there's a system, there's a standard, there's a package. But I think to necessarily have to think, I don't see how we have to designate which particular factors. And those specifics should be included into the personnel policy. The other comment I have is, I guess, the promotion piece. And it's possible that the GovHR could change this particular situation regarding promotion, and therefore maybe we should wait or not. I mean, we don't, here it talks about its greater responsibilities, classification with a higher salary range, but we don't even know what HR was going to be recommended. So I'm cautious, I guess, as to being, again, overly specific. And do we have, what's the value?
Right, that's a good point. I guess what concerned me was the current definition says that it is a classification with a higher maximum salary. So perhaps it would be better to have no definition at all in the bylaw at this point than that way.
Sorry, Nate.
So
well, I
that's
think
a good question. In fixing one problem or confusion, are we creating potential for another?
And so that can be noted. I guess I don't know necessarily what the answer is. I think my basic preference is to move as many things into, at least I think everyone's to move into policies and procedures, as opposed to trying to put it into the bylaw. And then if you're going to make a word change, or you've got to go to town meeting, that just seems very inefficient.
Yeah.
And I think we all agree with that. Did you have some comments on that?
I was actually going to say the same thing that you just said about classification system, that I thought was a little too specific, and it could be more generic, you could just say, here's our scale, period, and then, or say as outlined in, policy procedures, like that. That way, it gives you more responsibility.
So I'm just gonna interject that notes are gonna start from 5:12. I apologize if that was is always at 5:15. It started at 4:45, is that right? Okay, well, apologies, I was in another meeting till now, so there was no way I could have come.
It's okay, I was late too, so.
Say so. Here he is. Okay, and I think catch me up on where the discussion is.
We are on the agenda. We moved right to, and we gotta go back and let Joe introduce himself, and a little bit about his background. But we're at item three, the first bullet, which is essentially reviewing the possible bylaw amendments. This is the same discussion, the same material that we reviewed last time. And we're trying to understand and have there some edits of some kind. Or edits, yes, there have been edits. We're discussing those. We still have to, at a point in time, like tonight, agree that in fact is going to move forward with any of these warrant articles. And so I think what I'd like is, we just finished in the packet, the page that dealing with definitions.
Yeah.
And I had a comment regarding the classification system and as well as Kate, and then I had a comment about definition of promotion. But I think what I'd like to do now is go back as starting and let Joe introduce himself and give us and the individuals who are on Zoom an opportunity to know about his background. And then I think it might be helpful to let Kelly sort of maybe give us an update on the LHR. I think that actually would be helpful as we then go through, because we're talking about compensation and classification right now. So, Joe, sure. Welcome to the Personnel Board. Glad that you're here. If you could sort of let us all know, let the folks and the citizens know a little bit about you.
Sure. So it's nice to be here. Thank you all for welcoming me. I'm glad to be a part of the team. So my background, I'm originally from Erie, Pennsylvania, so it's the northwest part of the state, up in the Great Lakes area. I moved here to Concord back in 2015, largely for work. My background, kind of before we get into the work story, is I did spend most of my, growing up years in the Erie area, and I went to school at School of Industrial Labor Relations at Cornell in Ithaca, New York. So winter, and now more winter here. So definitely used to that, and we couldn't get away from that over the years. But my professional experience is manufacturing background. So I've worked for a company that did shingle roofing manufacturing a number of years ago. And then most of my career has been with Welch's grape juice company. So food and beverage manufacturing. Started back in the Erie area from my hometown, and then I've been here at our headquarters, which is over on Baker Ave, since 2013. So I've been a number of years, but been looking to get involved in town now, as I've been here for 7 years in town and living here. It's just my wife and I, so we love the area. Kind of home away from home. I still have all my family back in the Erie area, but looking forward to getting to know everyone here on the board more, as well as some of the town members and contributing. So anything else, and there's questions or like more information, I'd love to get to know her.
Well, welcome, and certainly we'll call upon you to and certainly volunteer whatever comments you have. So we're glad that you're here.
And can I just, for the records, you were able to get sworn in, so you're a voting member now, or is it just participation?
I took the oath yesterday.
Okay.
I think that gets me up to speed.
Okay, Kelly, could you give us sort of the status of the gun HR and we're making reference to HR already, so I think it might be just a good idea to try to see what the landscape looks like here.
Absolutely, thank you. Kelly Hebert, HR manager, consultant, interim assistant town manager. We are actually in the throes of the analysis stage of our project. A lot of worksheets, spreadsheets, talking with our consultant, Joelle, is president of GovHR. So we've been working one-on-one with her over the past few weeks, actually, to review all of the data, all the information that's come into us. We had over 11 departments contributing information. We had 10 interviewers from GovHR interviewing almost 200 employees. The employees that we're talking about represent all of the non-union regular status employees. Those titles were included within the scope of our project. And there's a lot of work, a lot of data that's involved in this. While we are basically going through all of the JAQs, so for the job analysis questionnaire, every one of our titles and employees had a chance to gather that information, to submit that with their job description. GovHR effectively took all that information and basically scored using their own system. They scored each one of the jobs based on 9 different factors. And so we're really going through that data and trying to make sure that we've got the best way, the best system in place to gauge how do we group certain positions with other positions. So this whole idea of a classification system is really a scientific term that makes general sense. It's about finding a way to compare groups of things with other groups of things. And you want to do that in such a way that there's a methodology around it. So what we're doing is really evaluating positions based on those 9 factors, giving them scores, coming up with a score. Now what we're doing is really clarifying questions about how those jobs are scored, looking to see where there might be outliers that cause this question. Is that because we're a very unique employer? Or is that because there's something that was unaccounted for or left out of the mix? So we're asking all of those questions. We're meeting with the department heads to make sure we didn't miss anything along the way. They haven't seen the scores, or we're trying to look at classification. And what that really means at this point is within all of those titles, all those 200, almost 150 titles, which one belongs where on our new classification grid? The last time we did this was about 14 years ago. A lot has changed in that amount of time. So we're making sure that we're measuring the right criteria and we're comparing similar criteria so that we can make that judgment with our consultant, which position goes where. As we're doing that, however, GovHR is also compiling. We have information from over 28 different communities. At least 20 of those will be our general benchmarks. So they're finding benchmark titles, again, so that we can compare those types of titles with the ones that exist here, so that we can gauge and measure our external equity, and also so that we can make sure that our compensation plan is going to hit the market at the right place. And it allows us a new system to establish how our classification plan and that compensation plan will come together. And all that basically comes down to the work that we're doing here, or the work we've been doing, meeting every week, is really to get this level of detail somehow in a way that we can also reserve a spot on the town meeting warrant to ensure that we can effectively implement that plan when it is fully disclosed and reported out by our consultant. Now, they don't plan to release that data, that information. That won't be ready. We won't have a final report by the time the warrant needs to be produced. So we're in a little bit of a challenging situation right now, and that's why Amy's been discussing, and we've been talking about what do we need to get into the warrant so that we have the ability once a year, only at town meeting, to update that new classification plan, given that we're doing all of this other work right now at the same time. So we're trying to balance that. So my update is that we are working furiously to get this project
done, but we want to make sure it's done correctly, that it's as accurate as we possibly can do that. And we are meeting at least 2-3 times a week with our consultant. Amy and I spent the number of work hours just working through that data and making sure that it's as accurate as possible, so that we're going to come out with a system that will bring us into this current workforce with the best possible tools available to us to be able to grade our existing and future jobs that come online at the town. Thank you again for
Thank you. Any questions from the board?
So what I'm asking, is that the classification system, the new piece that we're looking at, sounds like it's actually something that we will need going forward. It's going to be addressing exactly what they're doing. And that what we will be looking at as we go forward, particularly with other job descriptions and stuff. So I'm just trying to figure out if this is in here because they are truly using that now to do what they're doing. Yeah, is that how I understand it? So therefore, keeping it in here would be the best thing to do.
We've always had a classification system. So in the years that I've worked in Concord, this would be our 4th. They're all very similar. They're based on the same concept. So we're going to have 9 factors, we're going to have 13, but there's always been a classification system, even if it wasn't defined in the personnel bylaw. The bylaw says there needs to be a system with a uniform factor. So it's, do we need to add that to the definition or not? Does it help anything? And I believe that one of the definitions above is, the under classification plan, again, it said the classification plan is, currently it says that it includes classification title and a job description, and that would that's not the classification plan, it's typically, that's the most considering. I think she came with the home, but she considered it that, no, she didn't think of the job description as the classification plan. So that's how this path developed, where we get to really define classification system, but we have always had one. And yes, it's an important part and we're required to under
Any other questions from the board?
I have
Yes, no.
necessary help, so it's gonna come over. It's been waiting, right? So I should talk really loud.
First, sorry, I'm late once again, and Amy, you're here, so you're feeling better, so you got over COVID.
At least it's 7 days of negative test results. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, it's good to see you. I'm glad that you're feeling better. And I think what I've been working with all the documents and, the red line documents and the others, and given what Kelly, you just told us about how much work you're doing with GovHR right now, I wonder if, and I know I was pushing it, so I apologize, but I wonder if we should not change the bylaws in an article this year, given that the class and comp stuff isn't available yet. And so we can't really align them. And if we do some changes now, that will leave us with, well, we've already changed the bylaws, but we really need to update it after the classification and compensation. And so do we, work on and continue to work that we're doing, but not put more stress on the system when we can't really get them all aligned, and just concentrate on an article for the warrant for this year that has the class and comp work from GovHR. What do you think?
Good question. Good question.
And I agree. I think it's a great question and something that needs to be considered. I think it would be looking at it from the perspective of not making changes that are specific to a system, that are specific to GovHR, but it opens the doors to make sure that something doesn't get misunderstood or become a barrier, like, oh, that just doesn't really fit in where we're going. For example, one of the ones they started to talk about was the fact that it said there needs to be an intermediate wage. I think that may not be what that plan looks like. So it might be better to take it out now. It's a small change. It wouldn't, we can't have one, but it keeps it from being restricted. But I do think that's a really important thing to think about with all of these, and at the right time, We just tried to go through and find things that had raised questions or concerns or might kind of limit what happens with the classification plan. But it shouldn't be specific. Anything here should not be specific to a plan, I agree.
So just two more comments then, to follow on that. So one thing I think that's going on and reflecting on our presentation to the select board, which was only last week, right? That what I heard from the select board, and I'm slowly getting aware of all of what, we took from that, is they really want us to look at the charge. And that charge is something that is, if I understood correctly, that's something that we really have to focus on for our March presentation back to the select board. And maybe, as a board, that we can talk more and really gain more agreement with the select board on what is the personnel board charge, and incorporate what comes out of GovHR, and then really look at how the bylaws need to be aligned with all those other things. The second point I had was, and I saw the memo that went out to all the town employees, right? This was from Amy and Kelly, this one. I had some real points here that I think we also need more time with employees, to really help them understand. And there was a chart that was attached to the note, right? This is the chart, 10 pages that went out with it. Is that right or not?
No, so.
No, okay, so only this note went out. Is that right?
Can I see the title of the memo?
Human Resource Department Memorandum, Project Update, Classification and Compensation Study.
So that was in the packet for tonight's meeting, of information, and that was the last item in the packet.
Okay, so that was
Update for you, the chart that you're looking at was put in to exactly your point, which is there needs to be discussion about the chart. So I created something to help, that I thought would be informative for you in that discussion.
Okay, I might not get that comment in the minutes because I'm going to finish mine and then I'll try to get back to it. But right. So what I do think we need to do for the class and compensation, and again with limited time, as you all are working so hard with GovHR, is we really need more communication with the folks that are going to be impacted by what comes out. And when I read this memo, I got three comments. Wednesday, December 14th, so they would have had to come tonight, and they only got this within a week, right? So that's really tough. And the time of the meeting wasn't here, so maybe they didn't know a time. And then it also, there weren't any dates or any specifics about, except for tonight, there wasn't anything more long-term about what to expect or where to go for information, that sort of thing. And I think you just didn't have the time to do that. So that too led me to think what we really need to do is really focus on GovHR's work, get that through to an article, and then have more time to really discuss with employees, because those articles for class and comp alone are going to have quite an impact on them, right? Potentially, right? Because we don't know that outcome. So those were my thoughts. And I'll capture them later.
So there are several elements to that. Let's get back together. There's a couple communications that went to employees. I think the one that you're looking at is the class and comp study update.
Yeah.
There's another one that I sent you yesterday. It wasn't in the packet. It wasn't selected as part of this meeting packet, but one that went to employees about meetings over a couple of weeks. At your last meeting, my understanding was that you all thought, let's see how employees react. Let's find out whether this is a big skill or helpful or is it not, so you can make the decisions on whether to submit something for the warrant related to the bylaw or not, or it's just not enough. And so that's where I thought the 4:45 start time came, and they were asking for employees to be specifically invited. And we actually put that out over two. The way we communicated was to fit from over two meetings and to let them know what was going on, and give them a list of other ways that they could provide comments and feedback. But I agree, this is a very short period of time, and we want to be careful about, is this the time to do any much change or not? Clearly, a priority is the personnel board chart and the class, and another one is the class and home study. But the question before we get to the warrant deadline, is there anything else that would be helpful to lay that groundwork, or is this just not the right time to propose any bylaw change that would help to, for the next year and to allow that class and comp study to go in. So those are all the consideration. There is another, there is other communication. It was tough, even the getting things to employees to describe what it would be for a meeting in less than a week's time, and making sure we had the room available and all that. And it was definitely a flurry of activity to do the communication that you got last Wednesday night. So, yeah.
Well, I think, there's several themes that were operating a week ago. And they were just a part of our meeting. They were in the room. But, one was really trying to be responsive to the personnel task force, their recommendations, and trying to be, and there was a lot of emphasis put on, we wanted to be able to demonstrate the personnel board wanted to demonstrate its commitment to following through on it. So we identified 21 different potential areas. So I think this has all been a work in progress, for sure. I think clearly the points that Linda has made this evening are very relevant, and it may have been, if we had to do it all over again, maybe I wouldn't have been pushing for at least trying to get a sense about what people were thinking about with the bylaw changes. But be as it may, we're here right now. We have got the opportunity to we can do it tonight. We can actually wait till next week in terms of officially or formally deciding what we are going to do with or without bylaw changes. Yes, I think we all agree. We agree that it's critically important to get the work of HR and get that into a warrant, which the personnel board is sort of is a participant, but because nobody on the personnel board has the knowledge about how warrants are formulated, how they're written, what are some of the underlying issues that we need to take into account. This is really where moderating plays a very key role, and Amy's had contact with the moderator, and so I think we're moving down a path that makes good sense. But I think we've got, if I take a look at the landscape, we've got the warrant article due on the 4th of January. So it sounds to me like we are not going to have a warrant article proposed for the reclassification system, class and comp system, at all ready on the 4th of January. So what I have no idea is, so then what happens? We make reference in the letter to the employees, but it would be great to have a little bit more, for me, more specificity as to, okay, we don't have the nicely tied together, completed article dealing with the new of HR work. So what are the alternatives? What are the different pathways that we're going to have to follow so that at town meeting, the town meeting can have a vote on this new system?
And you guys are talking to the town moderator, is that right? So do you have any responses about GovHR's timeline and their warrant timeline?
Well, so I had an email with the moderator who was looking at some of that and getting consideration, and I need to follow up with her. I also this week was in contact with town council, looking at what options we have and have a better sense of some of the things to talk with the moderator about. So, I don't know that, I would say, I don't think it's that we wouldn't have a classification and compensation article, okay? It's what would the article what kind of article would be acceptable to allow a class and comp plan to go to town meeting and have enough time for it to be vetted through citizens and employees and all of that. And there are a couple potential paths for that we're trying to look at. So one, and this is more a legal question, but I don't know if the right way to go, would be, could the personnel board, during the course of the year, amend the class and comp plan fully and then have it ratified at the next time? And I think that's a pretty big step and it's a different way than we've done it in the past, but that is one thing. And council is looking at it as, yes, the current bylaw would allow that. So you have to think about that carefully. And what would that mean? What would the communication be? That might be one way to do it. Another might be, I understand that Concord has had, in its warrant, and this is, the warrant deadline in Concord is earlier than many, and even some of the procedures, and in many towns where they could give kind of a general idea describing that there's going to be a classification and compensation system, but not print all the schedules in there, and that would come later by motion. And so my understanding is that legally that's allowed, and then it's a question of what's allowed in Concord in terms of what should be in the warrant and what are voters expecting and how do we make sure that everybody is informed. So there's a balance here of ensuring everybody's informed and finishing the process, and also being aware of, it doesn't go for another year, well, that's not good either, right? So it's trying to find wording that works and is acceptable through that whole process. And so, maybe it's that there are two articles, one that is, if the moderator finds it acceptable, that has broader wording without a new structure in it, that certainly notifies all the voters that this process is going on. And if there's something that everybody feels is ready to take vote on, that is moved, with, a hand up and all of that, so that, and having publicized the result beforehand. As a backup, there could be a second article that has the existing class and comp plan with adjustments to it. So that we at least have something that moved, and then that second article wouldn't have to be moved to town meeting. There could only be a motion on it if the first one didn't go through, if they weren't ready. So like it's kind of having a backup procedure on which one gets moved to town meeting depending on the stage and whether people feel that everything before and all of that. Does that make sense? Because I know this process is a little bit.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say, I agree with Liz. I mean, I think I've said this a couple of times in prior meetings that I thought this was going really quickly and it's a huge job. That said, now that we're here and we have some sort of concrete pieces that we could move forward, and I think that clarifying language rather than sort of encapsulates what's happening with WHR, I think I would be comfortable just trying to, because that is responsive to the task force, the employees, and then later we can move forward with the charge and the full bylaw review. So
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have any thoughts or comments? Amy, one of the considerations that I would hope could be included as we go down this path, and this sort of goes to the issue of transparency. I'd like to be able to have some member, a member, two, whatever is allowable, so that somebody on the personnel board can follow, can participate in communications or whatever, so that it's not just the moderator or town council that is. I mean, they have their roles for sure, but I think if we're trying to encourage and we're trying to promote the value of the personnel board, then here's a wonderful opportunity to include the personnel board in discussion, recognizing that the personnel board can't make the final decision one way or the other. But yes, it's just a real good opportunity for transparency and to demonstrate another example of how the personnel board can be a more active participant.
Sure.
So I don't know how that gets activated or how that gets accomplished, but I think not that I'm looking for an answer at all tonight, but it's sort of a request for Encore.
Well, I guess I would like to get to that, and that I agree. And I would like Texas to do that. And that kind of goes back to, and I haven't reached out to Terry yet, but you and I spoke earlier this week, Bill, about getting a meeting together. And I think that's with that spirit in mind, that I think between, and whether you want to do somebody else on the board, but I think between you and the select board liaison and getting together with the moderator, I think this needs to be worked out. So I would appreciate having that meeting as well. And we're going to be just for my part. And this isn't, yeah, even though I've been doing, this a long time, we haven't had things with this level of complexity. And so I'm not going to say that I'm an expert in crafting. I'm going to do that whole,
I just wanted to make one clarification on the schedule. This Friday, we actually is the deadline for draft articles. So in that simplest sense, this is the draft that we're talking about right now, or at least one of the articles. There's typically 3 articles, right? One's for personal bylaw, one's for a ratification of position changes that have happened, and what's the third one I'm missing? But there are typically 3. And my point though is that we need a draft of some sort to hand in on Friday. And then January 4th is for the final articles, but we need a draft by Friday. So I think that it would be helpful to have some clarity around this discussion about, what should we continue to discuss so we can get something, sort of a placeholder with some of the language to the moderator, and then use that as sort of the line in the sand for, okay, are we willing to put this forward or not? So Friday, from what I understand, is that draft is the deadline for draft. I just want to clarify that we're all on the same page with respect to the dates.
That's a good point. Thank you. Any comments from you?
So I just want to ask, like on section 5, classification plan, 5, 1, 3, and 4. It's not a lot of changes that we do. And under compensation, kind of the same thing. But I don't know if that's something that we look at. I have no idea. Just, if we want to make the class clearer and easier for the employees to understand, would they be easy enough to do without having to, make a lot of the changes that we would make are basically clarified?
Well, I think that's a good question for sure. I don't think there's absolutely a right or wrong answer here. I think what we have, let me just summarize, and then we can see if on things or not. But we really, for tonight purposes for the 16th of Friday, the only issue on the table is really whether we're going to include any of the items that we've been talking about last week and this week, or not, because Liz has suggested one alternative is we're not going to address any of that. We're going to wait until we get the GovHR material, and we actually have a path forward for new classification comp system, and then we can move to a regular meeting session. We reconvene and we take a look at the bylaw, and we'd be then at that time be able to determine what perhaps needed to be changed and what didn't. And there may be additional changes that will result from the GovHR work. So that's one position. The other position was, I think, expressed by Kate, is okay, well, we've already done some work. We could we could try and, we would communicate, the opportunity to communicate in an article, some changes, some modifications, that might help overall. But those are two different paths. And I think what we need to do right now is determine, do we want to make any changes to the personnel bylaw or not? Because once we make that decision, and if it's yes, we're gonna make some changes, then we have to decide what changes to make. But I think we've got.
So I feel like I have one comment to reflect on that, and that was, we were rushing and we were pushing forward in order to best support the employees, right? And that's the goal overall. And so then, if we do these changes, how does that get received? Is it received by those employees? Do they think, oh, these are only cosmetic changes, and we thought they were really doing something bigger, and then they're more deflated? Or do they think, well, there's something here, they're trying and more is to come? So how we communicate it, I guess, is very important. But I wonder if anyone else has any other thoughts about how those employees would feel with the changes if we were to go through with some. Anyone? Kate?
Well, I kind of feel like you're probably gonna get both of those responses, to be honest. And I don't know that there's any way around that. I think you're right. The way in which we communicate that to them is important, and maybe we actually say, look, we know that there's a lot more here that we need to address. This is the first step in a larger process. We just didn't have the time to really to break this down and do it thoughtfully in a short period of time. So, I mean, I think you're right. Communication is really important.
And I think there are everything to be done by really looking at the policy. So we keep laying the groundwork through the bylaw, and much because there are these deadlines related to the bylaw. We need to be working on the policies, and we'll always get, kind of put aside, or don't need this, or whatever, and there's always something that happens. And that's where employees are going to start seeing more of a difference. And, Kelly and I have been really looking at those and preparing to have discussions on those with the understanding that cost and comp plan is the number one priority, right? So we've been doing that. We can't do everything. Cost and comp is the number one priority. But there are meaningful changes that can also be done through policy updates that the bylaw already provides some ability to work on. And I'll note it, we get even something like the sick leave proposal in here. I'm going to show something. There's some thoughts on that. They don't maybe think we're taking something away. We thought about it would be to make something easier, but and allow for some changes that's easier if helpful. But again, the messaging on it and the understanding that we're not going to have the policy to go with it, which is kind of what happens every year. There's a discussion, and then it's the next priority, and never finish one. We've got to get back to these policies to make that differential. I don't know that I said that all well, but I do think that what will make a difference to employees is if they know, kind of here are the priorities, here's the path, here's things right beyond the class.
And I agree. I think that's well said. Well, I think we're at a point that we should entertain a motion from the personnel board as to whether or not you want to defer any bylaw changes or not. It's essentially taking Liz's comment, I believe, and normalizing that so that we can actually have the personnel board make a definitive statement as to its position on whether any bylaw changes will, we are going to move any bylaw changes to town meeting this year. So I need someone to to, offer a motion.
Okay. Exactly, Mike. All right, this is Liz, and I'm gonna, offer a motion that we defer for now the changes to the bylaws, from, this year.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. Any additional thoughts, conversation before we vote as a board? Okay, so the motion on the table is that we defer.
I did say one.
Oh, absolutely.
No, that's okay, it's my fault, I didn't know. I did say one thing, is there anything, I guess I asked this before, I just don't want us to miss out doing one small thing that might make the difference in helping us with the class comp and what we need to do. I can't see that far ahead, I certainly understand what you're proposing, and I do agree with that. As long as I know that by doing that, we're not shortchanging, what's with the class. So that's just my opinion.
And Nancy, if I can add to that, I'm really nervous about wording that we put in and then we don't get back to it too. So if we look at the sick leave, town manager shall adopt policies to provide further definition of accrual. That's a real hanging chad issue, isn't it? Because it doesn't get enough for them to feel comfortable about what's happening. So that's one issue. And then I know, and I was recalling in earlier discussions about a work at home policy. The world has changed now. We don't have anything on a work at home in here either. And so that's where I was struggling with the communication, and Kate, your comments were relevant. They're not gonna be happy either way in a sense, because we're not finishing. But if we finish badly or halfway, that makes me more nervous than not. So anyway, I'm with you on that too.
If we hire if we don't do a good job, then we accomplish nothing.
Right.
Yeah, we'll probably accomplish that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so, yeah.
Okay, so
Oh,
I think,
okay.
Can I comment on
Okay,
that?
sure.
I agree with what was said, and, I think that I would not strictly think, I put it there because it had been raised, and I was throwing out the things that people had brought up, and the question has to do with how it's approved. But I'm concerned too about it, and getting chatted with that, so, and given some of the wording, I would suggest a little bit differently than that first. That said, to Nancy's point, does it make sense to, for this year, look at taking out the requirement that the classroom plan have an intermediate base wage? Does it make sense to predict, on the job descriptions, to just strike some of that language about the job description connection, which isn't technically the way that, that the classification system is set up or would be. So are there a couple minor things like that would help, or is it the fact that they've been like that anyway? Why shift the attention if we've been there, leave it alone? So I get both sides of that, and this is all for you to consider, and we're happy to go ahead either way. So,
Okay.
So I'm getting up to speed, but just a question on that. Is there anything in these definitions, the way they're worded today, kind of line of sight to the future that might come back in this report that would prohibit us from moving forward with something that we might want to do that might be beneficial for employees? But we not have line of sight to that. You'd hate to get a recommendation back from this report that says move forward with whatever that might be, but then I have language that restricts us. And I'm just catching on, so I don't know, what may or may not be in place.
So looking at it quickly from that perspective, things that I would think we might want to consider would be the tie to the job descriptions, the intermediate base wage, perhaps. And we're about the definition of promotion and how it will work with the end of this system, and maybe just striking it. Okay. No, I'm figuring out the solution for that, because that is, and that, I just sort of, time on it. That's clear, and I don't,
Amy, I'm sorry, I missed one, intermediate-based wage, definition of promotion, there's something in between there, there's
Job description.
as part of that, yeah, like removing the component to the job description is defining it as part of the classification format.
You're trying to put it one.
And there's a couple places where it refers to intermediate, it doesn't say days, and then the tab for recommended, just making sure that it's a good, refers to accepted, provided for in section 10 of this bylaw, but that's, again, then, that's not gonna make it, people have understood, some people have understood that for a while, that's clarification, so maybe not worth spending time on now.
But isn't there, to Joe's point, isn't there an opportunity for the personnel board to make recommendations that will go live before 2024, the warrant article? Right, so we can make recommendations to changes that could align us with GovHR work. It comes out, and then the assumption is that it would then have to go into an article for the warrant for town meeting in the year following.
Correct.
Yeah,
Right,
right.
there's nothing that precludes us from preparing this well in advance
Yeah,
of the next
And-
2024 town meeting.
and
Nothing precludes.
so preparing it for the 2024, but also it being acted upon before that actually happens.
Yeah.
Not just bylaw language, no.
All right, so then we wouldn't be stuck with in the way that you're concerned about, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if like if there's a recommendation that comes back from this work and the language in the bylaws, says let us implement that. Is that something we should consider?
But I thought she was right. I thought maybe that once we got HR, all that came back, say it came back in March. Yeah, in town meetings, April, the end of April. Is there any way to have something that would allow us to take that since it was completed and was something that the town paid for and be able to present it to town meeting and get voted on?
And that's the question that needs to be decided with the moderator in the room.
Just wondering.
It's separate from the bylaw, not the
Are we given credit, right? We're really talking about a few different things. First of all, in the history of the town, well, not the history. We're looking at last year's town meeting. The three articles are with respect to personal bylaw, what we're talking about now. Ratification, vote, and then also upgrading the classification there.
Yeah.
So there's three. So those are the three we're gonna have to say, okay, we wanna put in a placeholder, we should give something to moderator by Friday to say, we wanna reserve these spots, even if we have to, allow ourselves some time for next week's meeting to decide what's going to go within this particular one. We've done that. So the question here with all of this is, and I just wanted to refresh everyone's memory, because I've been going through the line by line, the task force report, and trying to intersect where that fits with the bylaw and the policies. And we're moving along very well. The issue here is that it's a matter of scope. We started with, I had 8 things, and then it turned into 21, because we're trying to be very comprehensive. Now it's down to 10 things, so we've got to work right here. Now the question becomes, are you gonna do anything, which would mean picking and choosing these 10, or doing nothing? There's a couple of pieces to Joe's point that might be a little bit difficult, which is the example was the intermediate. I mean, we don't know what system HR is going to request. They might want steps, they can want another bid, minimum bid dash, whatever. We don't know that yet, which is why we were trying to allow ourselves the greatest amount of latitude and flexibility by striking that intermediate from it. That sort of clears the path for us to move forward. So what is here are the 10 things that we sort of boiled down that we think if the board wants to move forward with an article that talks about personal bylaw changes, it would in one fact affirm a lot of the work that the personnel secretary task force is working on. Some things are very minor. And I guess the question really is, how much of this would anyone consider to be housekeeping or minor language changes, as opposed to more substantive changes. And where these fall within those two choices. I think there's a lot in here that is maybe having that. And so my whole point is to say, we've narrowed this list to 10. We don't have to move forward with 10. But if this board feels that even doing a few of housekeeping to acknowledge the role of the task force in coming up with some of these suggestions, this would be the way to do it. And the only difference, if you vote nothing, we'll save one article on the, on the town meeting warrant. But we're basically down to 10 things that we see after all of the work we've done that might have a common understanding and might be seen as more proactive, clearing the way for what is next to come, which is that new classification plan. If we do nothing, that's really up to you folks, but everything you need to make that decision is right here in front of you. And it's just a matter of dialogue, which of these 10 things, if any, you want to move forward.
Can I ask a question? So historically, it seems to me that the personnel bylaw has sort of changed incrementally every year over a long period of time. And so these housekeeping, I'm actually asked this, it seems to me that that's what's going to happen. And so making small house, you call not substantive changes, is not out of the norm of what the personnel board has done in prior years. So making these smaller changes now in preparation for a larger change next year seems like it would fit and be responsive to the personnel. That's personal stuff.
And I haven't done bylaw changes every year,
Right.
but sometimes it's 3 years or 5 years, but yes, and then the combinations, specific housekeeping and just around the authority that we consider to be a major change in these working conditions. And a lot of times it's more specific than that, whether we added that sick leave could be approved, 3 days on the hire, that sort of thing. But yeah, yes, it is.
Yeah.
That's just one other clarification. There's nothing that would preclude us, I believe, maybe it's a question to the moderator, but I don't believe there's anything that would preclude us from putting in a placeholder, including all 10 items. And then at next week's meeting, saying, what, out of these 10, these 3 just don't make sense. We got a lot of feedback. People think that, why are we doing that? They don't agree. We can take them off because the final isn't due till January 4th. So if that provides any clarity with respect to the process, you could move forward with that and then still have some time to pull back and take stuff off the plate. As
One thing is how many meetings to be left between now and January 4th.
That's the one and one on January 4th.
When is the one?
The next week. And then I didn't know if there were things left, or we might want to see if we can meet early on for if there was anything remaining at that point. Or also depending on where the applicants is also the option to something.
Well, I'm concerned that and this has already been said, but I'm concerned that if we do anything too quickly, that is worse than deferring and doing it correctly, in my mind. And so that, the value judgment, obviously, that I think is critical for me. So I'm gonna call us to vote on the motion. I think we've had more than enough good discussion. Thanks.
So I can restate the motion so that I
I have to say vote early. Okay, this is better than I stated. So let me see if I can find one. No, I just put it in later. Okay, so I think that it was, I make a motion that the personnel board recommend not to go forward with an article to change wording in the bylaw this year. So that we can do more substantial changes in the future.
So that's the motion.
And I just didn't know if you want to invite any employee or public comment.
Sure.
Okay.
Any
Because we've already-
comments on the motion? the table? Please, if there is, so Terry.
I'm having some trouble hearing. So, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, the sound quality is a little weird today. So the motion that you just took, was it, to not, do bylaw changes?
Right.
But what about, are you having a placeholder for the classification and compensations?
Yes,
Okay. Okay, great. So, my other comment might have to do with the bylaw then. It was when you started the meeting, you were talking about, before Liz arrived, the definitions of the classifications and composition. Is that part of the, bylaw change that we're not going forward with now anyway?
yes,
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, I was just going to comment that sometimes people get confused between the salary range and actual salary of a particular person. So the range is for the position and the actual salary for the person. And I was just going to say it might be good to note that in a comment. So you might not need that if you're not changing the bylaw. And
correct.
or maybe you need it because you're doing the compensation and classification anyway.
Okay.
I think the employees get it, but the public doesn't always get it. The difference between the actual salary. You know, having listened to the appeal that you did recently, I think there was some confusion between actual salaries and ranges.
Correct.
To always clarify them.
Any other, thank you, Terry, thank you very much. I don't see any other hands, feet, or fingers, so I think we'll, let's move to a vote. So, all in favor of the motion, which is not to make any changes to the bylaw this year, say aye, or we'll get to a word on the table. Nancy? Aye.
No,
Ron? Aye. Aye. And Bill will be aye. Okay, so there it's vote 4-1. That we,
I'm not sure, because I think it's important to note that we're really, we're recognizing all sides of the issue, so thank you. It's not an easy,
so we're, as I think I've tried to point out this, I don't think there's a right or wrong. But it's very, we just need to make certain that we're entertaining everyone's thoughts and positions, and I think we had good discussion, and I think we can move on. Okay, so at this point then, with having made that decision, do we need to have a vote as to reaffirming the intent to do a bylaw change of class and compensation? Or not? What do we need in order to, if any?
Vote, I don't know if it has to be vote, but it doesn't matter. So my understanding is now, the intent is to move forward with a warrant article that is a standard practice to ratify classification actions from the past year. That's just, it's not, it's just the standard wording and all that. I think that's not already review, so that's number one. And then number two is my understanding is that everybody would like a warrant article related that allows for implementation of a new classification and compensation plan, one way or another. And if there is recognition that we're not ready to print that plan in the warrant. And so therefore, there needs to be an approach that would allow for that, rather than waiting for yet another year, but would allow for that with public comment in view, employee comment in view, and I don't have the full path to them. And so I thought that would be something to to work on very much over the next week, obviously, and Bill, whether it be you or somebody else to work with the chair. I think also Terry, if she agrees, Terry Ackerman would be helpful to have involved in that discussion, the moderator, and then if there are some, I don't know, questions for town council, but really working to get that path so that everybody's needs are met through this.
Okay, but if I, let me play this back, if I understand you, we don't need any action on behalf of the personnel board to make that happen. It'll happen simply by course of past practice, the history of how classification will be, or how compensation and classification systems are put into place.
Yeah, I would like, I think that ultimately the board voting on the warrant article language, I think that, so whether that be next week or really finally on, that's why I wanted to talk about maybe on the fourth scene that you made earlier, or down to that, just so that the board is saying, yeah, the other option is to say that you all agree with the intent and you leave it to the chair. Both of those approaches have been used for the years, depending on where we're at, but I think it would be great for the board to vote on the warrant article language as a whole, if we can get that. So not today, I don't think we need a vote today.
Okay.
I just need some direction for the conservation, but I do think that is where you're headed and would be good.
Well, I think my preference would be for us all to participate in a vote, which could be done on the 4th of January. So I think we'll be able to determine more clearly next week in terms of how time do we need to meet in order to do that. Hopefully by that time there will have been some meetings, some gathering of moderator, the town council, select board, the town manager, whoever in the town management, and someone on the personnel board just to move us to the next step. That would be my expectation for the next.
So I'm trying to make sure that we get clear too in the minutes. I just realized it. In there, Bill, sorry. So what that, there's another, how do we get there to January 4th? Unless we're just stamping yes, we need to have it how many days in advance so that we can take a look at it. And if there are any questions, we have to coordinate back and forth, right? So I'm just worried that if we say, yeah, everything will be handled on the 4th, there's really no way to go back through what you just described. And so either that process is more the process of you meeting with Terry and the town manager or town moderator and HR department, how that is then conveyed to the rest of the board members so that we are prepared to vote on that.
And I can send it to you, so that it gets, you can't deliberate, so that goes back to the point line, CC you, and say, all comments come back, and I can just, get it to that point. And you have a great team in the audience. For the meeting to happen.
Oh, yes, Anita.
Thank you. I want to introduce the option, and Amy, you may have already considered this, and I also want to second Terry. The audio tonight is very bad on one side of the table. We can hear Bill, Liz, and Kate, and actually Nancy, I guess we heard. We really could not hear Kelly or Amy. It was all muffled. So something about the mics on that side of the table. But I wanted to pose the possibility of a special town meeting within the annual town meeting, which will give you another couple of months to finalize the language and hold all the hearings that you need to do in terms of the new classification and comp plan. I think you're going to lose some credibility with employees if you put something rushed out for the annual town meeting that no one has had much time to provide feedback
and input, and there'll be questions. Having gone through several of these over the years, implementation can be time consuming, and explaining it to employees is time consuming. And I don't think there's any way you can have this done by January 4th. But if you had a special within the annual, you'd have probably until the end of February to finalize the language for the special. And Ned Perry, who's on this call, who's the former moderator, might want to chime in, but it's not ideal. But I think trying to push something that you don't even have now, before everybody by January 4th, I don't think that's feasible. And you're going to get 2 steps backwards in terms of your credibility with the employees. You've come a long way. You're making great progress. I think if you tried to pull something like that with no input from anyone, I think you'd be regretting it later.
Anita, can I thank you? And I've turned around at the moment, although I see I'm not on the camera.
I can hear you now. So whatever you're doing now.
Back to the microphone. I'm sorry. So
okay. So all right. Thank you.
So I do want to note that yes, the idea of that special town meeting is something that we discussed, trying to figure out that. But we are not intending to print in the warrant a salary schedule that hasn't been vetted. So what we've been talking about is if there's another method that meets the requirements for a warrant article and allows for continued public review and employee review, that still gets it to a point where it could be implemented July 1.
Okay, as long as it isn't just something that allow the personnel board to make all the decisions for the coming year, and with no, I think that would be a 3 steps backwards. But no, I hear what you're saying. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Perry, you have your hand up still?
We can't.
There we go. I'm sorry. Ned Perry, 362 Bedford Street. Thank you, Mr. Chair. While I was town moderator, Anita Techley was the town clerk and taught me almost everything I know about town meetings. So I have been sitting here thinking exactly the same thing that Anita suggested, having a special town meeting within the town meeting. But there are a number of ways of accomplishing this, Mr. Chair. And I strongly I was quite impressed by the presentation you and Ms. Cobbs made in front of the select board. And I would encourage perhaps the 2 of you to sit down with the town moderator. When I was town moderator, I spoke frequently with all the chairs, including the chair of the personnel board, about the warrant. And it's really important for people on the personnel board to talk with the town moderator. She's in town this week, and her job is to work with you on figuring out how to get warrant articles put together and how they should be processed. And I don't think it works as well through an intermediary as it does with you, 1 or 2 of you going directly to the town moderator. She's the one that makes the decisions, and she runs the town meeting, as Ms. Techley taught me to do many years ago. So I hope that's helpful, Mr. Marachek. I really hope. I mean, I agree with you entirely that you want to have the personnel board involved and have a meaningful role here. And the meaningful role is for you to begin participating. I mean, I strongly encouraged you to go to that meeting a couple Saturdays ago, and for some reason you weren't there. And that's when Matt Johnson was surprised that you had warrant articles. If you had been there and telling him that you had warrant articles, he wouldn't have been quite surprised the following Monday. So please, please get involved. Thank you very much for allowing me to comment.
All right, thank you. Mr. Howell, yes, sir.
Hi, good evening, and thank you. And I really hesitate to go beyond Anita and Ned on suggestions on town meeting procedure. So I recognize that I'm following some people with real expertise, but I would point out that the class and compensation plan as it's presented at town meeting is essentially a list of job titles grouped in a certain way and with the associated salary ranges for that. And there certainly is precedent amongst other articles for the motion under the article to differ somewhat from the text as printed in the warrant. In fact, sometimes it's a complete replacement as long as it essentially accomplishes the same amount. I think going back to something that Ms. Cobbs mentioned, what's really important about this class and compensation study and the GovHR work is that the employees understand it, that they recognize it, and that it's been highly socialized with them. If you get to town meeting and the motion under the article for a class and compensation study reflects the output of GovHR, which has been well socialized with the employees, and they know what's being implemented, that's going to be success. The town meeting is going to go along with that. So I would really urge you, it's extremely unfortunate timing that the GovHR work is not done. I believe that at this meeting right now, you should in fact have in front of you a straw man that represents the results of the way that it's traditionally done, because you should be actually approving that as a preliminary submission to meet the deadlines. So I'm picking up on Mr. Perry's comment. It is important to recognize these calendars and make these dates and not be late for them. So I would encourage you to get those placeholders, the traditional method, the traditionally seen before class and comp articles ready to go, and then craft something out of the GovHR work that could potentially be substituted from that. And again, as you've been already advised, a conversation with the moderator at the point when you actually have the work ready to go to show the moderator can determine whether that's in fact a reasonable substitution for a motion under town meeting. Those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I want to apologize to the personnel board for obviously my failure to be at the January 4th meeting, which I guess I was under different impressions, but it doesn't speak well for me if I missed something that I should have been at. So I will apologize to my board people. So we are at the we voted. I mean, I think at this point we've essentially so let's talk about next steps. Because I think we're not going to address the personnel charge tonight. Well, there needs to be. I have some input that I haven't shared yet from Terry that needs to get to other members of the board. There's work obviously that the task force has done. We need to gather together all of the data so far we have on the charge. And I would also ask, Amy or the town or Terry, if there's a charge that in your mind speaks well of one of the boards of town as in terms of clarity, in terms of just the way the approach is, the substance, I'd be very interested in knowing which other board you might suggest we take a look at. We don't have to follow anybody, but I always like to know what others have done and sort of the opportunity to benchmark what in fact is a good, even to be a very good charge, and we then can have something more concrete to go on as we look at our own personnel board chart. So I'll be looking for Terry and or the town. Amy, if you've got any ideas or suggestions, that would be very helpful. Don't even now, but just to put that as a matter of record. So,
So can you mentioned next steps, so, I just wanna make a few comments on it, is that okay?
Yeah.
We're gonna, okay, all right, so, given public comments and where we are in the year, we've noted difficult decision, but the bylaw changes are gonna be on hold for now, understanding all the cautions that could bring about. Now, in terms of next steps, one thing that is always lingering in my mind, given the class and comp, because we have to wait on GovHR. I recognize it is regrettable. It's not with a straw man right now, but we don't have that. So what do we do? And in terms of next steps, I think it might be a good idea to take up for you, or if you want me to go in with the select board presentation to the town moderator and talk more directly. I'd be happy to do that as one next step. We just have to figure out when we're right to make that happen. And then the other sort of next step I just wanted to flag is that we had 5 employees that were unhappy with what came forward for their ranges, right? That was the adjudication that we had this year, right? Since we've been here, except for Joe. And what impressed me about that in the final review of everything was that, in fact, we as the personnel board had approved something that led to that decision. And I wasn't, and so when we're going to put something forward for the town meeting as an article, I just want to be really clear what the implementation on that action will be.
Right.
And that's why I think for you and I to go and talk to the moderator and really understand that there's another way where we can have a more, concrete look at the language that's going to go forward and not, be rushed with that. That'll help us to feel confident that we won't be putting employees in a feeling of distrust with the board.
excellent point. Totally agree.
Okay, all right, I'll get that in the minutes. I didn't write it down. Okay, thank you. So
we're going to, so the next step, we have a meeting that's scheduled for the 21st. Between now and the 21st, it would be, and I'd like Liz, if you've offered, I'll accept that as you and I to visit with the town moderator and any other appropriate party. Terry maybe would be under that category. I'm open to anybody, as perhaps the town moderator would be a good one to suggest we should be at that session. You think that somebody in the town management structure would be there, but be as it may, I would look to the town moderator to help and assist on which participants should be at that. So that particular meeting will guide us to, I think in my mind, clearer pathways for the approach to a warrant article for a new classification compensation system that HR Gov is the outside vendor that's supplying us with this. So I don't know if there's any other steps. I won't for anybody to comment any other steps besides that meeting that would be appropriate to include. Any other besides that meeting? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just looking, because then I'll write down my name. It's gonna stop.
Okay. So let's. So at our next meeting, we'll have a report back as to this meeting with the town moderator. we'll have a clear sense, the board will have a clear sense as to what its role and what its responsibilities, so I think will be. I think at the next meeting, we can tackle, because we'll have the additional data on the personnel board charge. I think that would be good for the next meeting, because that will include Terry Ackerman's input to the personnel task force. And then if there's a really board, again, I'm back to benchmarking, trying to get an idea as to which other board in town really has done an exceptional job. It would be perhaps a good model for us to follow. And we can start to modify the personnel board charge, which does not require a town meeting approval. All right. Any other comments before we move to adjourning?
I guess I would just like to, since we're not moving forward with the bylaw now, which is fine, I don't have an issue with that. I wanna, Amy had mentioned, trying to tackle some of the personal policies, develop themselves. And I think that is a step that we could take, in the short term that would speak to a lot of what's going on with the task force and maybe help, communicate to employees that we are, taking this seriously moving forward.
I think that's very smart. I think what we're going to need, though, is some idea of what that looks like. What would be the plan? How would we parse that so that we'd be able to start to really engage the personnel board into this process? This is all brand new for me, so we're looking obviously to Amy and Kelly for what input they could give us, guide us in terms of the formulated plan.
Right, and I'm gonna try to talk to everybody because they didn't feel like they could be heard before. Was my comments. So in terms of the policies, my thought, yes, I agree, we need to map out some things for you to consider. And I think timing wise, we're probably talking about that in January. So again, the class and comp study is a critical point, the Warren article, there's a lot of the coming weeks. But then I would think having a meeting dedicated to mapping out what are the ones that you could do shorter term, what are the ones longer term, what are the things that we're aware of. So absolutely, we'd love to dive into those. So
I think we need like next meeting. I don't
Yes. So even if it's not to begin work on it in January, then at least, daily, we're going to start getting to the point where we could begin to put a roadmap together. So that could be communicated, right? That's what I exactly.
And this will reflect.
Thank you.
have that.
All right, I think perhaps we can entertain any public comments now before we adjourn. Yes, Barry?
Just very briefly, Bill, I think you're giving my draft much too much credit. The draft we're going to look at next time, it's a very, very initial, very preliminary, just to, as you say, start to get the personnel board engaged in a discussion of what you could be, what you could do, just some ideas.
Right. Yes.
That's all it is.
But it is, what was impressive to me, Terry, is that you said you would offer something, you followed through, and we're all working on this as a team. So
right, and I had even forgotten that I had done it, so I didn't put a lot of thought into it. I totally forgot about it, and you're the one that remembered, Bill. So it's just
very good. Very good. All right, Mr. Perry, you have your hand up.
Ted Perry, 362 Bedford Street. Mr. Marachek, the Personnel Board is actually quite a unique committee or board in any municipality. So a charge to the Finance Committee, which is a committee actually sees the eyes and ears of the town meeting and is appointed by the town moderator, is not a bad sample because they operate fairly independently, and what they say goes. And hopefully, when you'll get the Personnel Board in a position so that when you decide something, it applies. But in the Personnel Study Task Force, in Appendix J, there are some samples of Personnel Board charges in other municipalities, and I would respectfully suggest that you might take a look at those as you put together your charge. As I say, I respect the Personnel Board, and I did work back in the 1990s for a number of personnel boards across the Commonwealth. And so I know how unique they are. And I really think that it's more appropriate for you to take a look at some of the other charges from other municipalities rather than, say, the Energy Committee or the Planning Board, because they're quite different from what your roles and responsibilities are. Thank you again. I hope that's helpful. Glad to talk with any one of you offline if anybody wants to pick my brain. Not that I have any more knowledge than I need exactly, but there you go. Thank you very much for allowing me to comment.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your words of wisdom. So,
would you like to consider the date and time of a meeting in the first week of January, or do you want to wait until next week? I was wondering if we could just confirm it right now. If there was one scheduled for the 4th at 5:15, which is a Wednesday, and that is the warrant deadline. I believe it's 4 o'clock is the deadline. And I didn't know if you either would want to meet earlier or in that day or even on the 3rd, in case you have something that you know.
well, we're at this point, since we're not going to be, well, we're not making any bylaw changes. We are doing the recap of the classifications that were done last year.
Right.
So that's language we haven't seen. I mean, I know it's all sort of a format term, it's structured and so forth, but it probably would make sense to see that.
Yeah, I'll get that to you.
And then I guess it's possible that based on the meeting of the town moderator, there may be some path forward there that will be suggested and would need to be discussed by the Personnel Board. So my gut feel is let's stick with the 4th of January as a meeting at 5:15.
Okay, so what I was thinking about was the classification and compensation plan warrant article itself, not the ratification, and how do we make sure that whether it be through a special town meeting or approach or through a again, as Mark Howell was saying, and I was talking about maybe putting in 2 warrant articles relating to class and comp to make sure we reserve a place for at least the current schedule and have something that would allow for changes. So I think whatever that outcome with the moderator is about, to approach the class and comp plan, that's the one that I don't know when that would be settled by next week. And so that's where I would think if the board wants to take that final vote on it, if that would need to happen before 4 o'clock on the warrant. That's fine.
So maybe we could take this up next week at our meeting again, because we'll have the meeting with the moderator before, 1 month.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yep, makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, I think we'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Okay, Nancy, thank you. And since all in favor can say aye.
Aye.
Okay. I thank you all very much. We got quite a bit accomplished. That's all we could.
Everybody will have a meeting, so that's fine.
Okay, good line. Thank you, Terry.
Those are-